thank you very much to, first of all, thank you very much to Irina for inviting us to join and collaborating with us on setting up this development, or this session today. In many ways, I've heard, so yesterday I heard mentioned that money isn't an issue, and I heard it again today that there is lots of money available. So in a way, then my job should be quite easy. It sounds like the onus is on people to come to us for all this money. Truth is a bit more nuanced, of course, and that's what I'm planning to talk about today. So I'm going to describe the challenges and solutions for financing renewable and efficient district energy systems. I see a few new faces in the audience that weren't here yesterday. So just so in case you're wondering who the EBRD is, we're an international financial institution. We're a development bank. We're owned by governments. So we're not a commercial bank, and we have different aims with our lending and investment. And we're also limited to working in specific countries, and those countries are mostly comprised of the countries of the former Soviet Union, countries of Warsaw Pact countries, former Yugoslavia, and countries in the southern and eastern Mediterranean. So our work stretches as far east as Mongolia and as far west as Morocco. Now, one more thing I must admit before we get moving is that I'm not a banker. I'm an engineer. But I've watched the bankers long enough to see it's not too hard what they do. So please take me at my word for what I tell you about today. Okay. I mentioned that we are a different kind of bank, and so we have different aims with our investments and our lending. And one of the biggest aims in what we're doing is improving our natural environment. So the term for green investment within the EBRD is what's called the green economy transition. And this is a pledge that the bank made that 40% of our business, which equates to around 4 billion euro, because we typically lend or invest around 10 billion euro a year, will be classified as green by 2020. We're well on target to meet that, and in the district energy sector, I have yet to work on a project in the district energy sector that hasn't met this criteria, be it because we are investing in energy efficiency improvements, we have made investments in renewables, not as many as we would like to yet, but I'll get on to that. But in general, district energy is a very green sector, and in the countries that we work in, there's a lot of, our money can make a lot of difference and can make some real improvements there. So, bearing in mind the areas that we operate in, so I'm not talking about Western Europe, describe the situation we're working with here. So, our economies in transition is the term for the countries that we work in. There is a large need for investment in these district energy networks. They have aging infrastructure. There is a lot of opportunities to improve their efficiency, throughout all the stages of generation, transmission and distribution, and at end user facilities. And also there is a need to integrate low carbon energy sources. Now, hopefully I don't offend Irina, but we talk about low carbon sources, not just renewable sources. So we talk about the opportunity to utilize waste or surplus heat as well. And it should be fairly obvious that there's a different set of circumstances in these countries than in Western Europe. They have different investment needs, like I said, because of the age of the networks, and they have different policy priorities. So perhaps it's good I've followed after the regulation presentation. So I would, without a doubt, there is there are some policy shortcomings in some of the countries we work in. Whether or not it's related to something as simple as a lack of consumption-based billing. This could be considered both an infrastructure and policy shortcoming. There may not be meters physically there, or if they are, even in some cases, consumers are still billed for their heat on the basis of the size or square meters of their apartment versus their actual consumption. And we even see in some countries of lower income, that tariffs for consumers are set at an artificially low level, with the intention that district energy operators, district heating companies, will receive a subsidy from their government in order to compensate for the gap between what is charged to consumers and their actual operating costs. But unfortunately, this gap isn't actually covered in a lot of cases, or payments from government to even their own government-owned companies can be late or not forthcoming. So we do see some countries, the district energy sector can be in a state of financial crisis in many cases, where companies are unable to make investments and infrastructure degrades in quality because they're unable to make this, but they're unable to raise tariffs. I don't know if anyone here is from Romania, but Romania is an example of a jurisdiction or country where there has been a problem with this, and unfortunately there's been the closure of a number of networks there. Anyway, on to a more positive note. So, what is the EBRD's approach in this area? So, how do we lend money, and how do we want to drive improvements in the sector? So, our most common form of collaboration with a district energy company. Most of our customers are public sector, owned by cities, what we call municipal district heating companies. So we will very often make what are called sub-sovereign loans. This means it's a loan to either the municipality or the company itself. The sovereign is the state, the national government, and we are able to bring in donor funding alongside our donor grant funding, CapEx grants, alongside our loans. We've done this throughout the Western Balkans region and throughout most of our countries of operation. We also work with on public-private partnerships, private loans, and even take equity stakes. And I'll go into a bit more detail about this later on. What we want to see come from these investments is increased energy efficiency, that consumption-based billing, meter-based billing, and improved standards of service for consumers. And of course, we want to see a reduction in the CO2 emissions associated with heating or cooling or electricity generation in those areas. And one of the benefits, the way we work with public sector clients in particular, is that we're able to leverage those grant funds that I described to assist in developing the projects and implementing the projects. So when a city-owned district heating company works with us, we will leverage grant funds to put together a comprehensive feasibility study, which will come up with a priority investment program to be funded by our loans and the grants that we can leverage. After signing a loan with the EBRD, we also offer support for implementation in most cases. So we will hire international consultants to assist with the tendering and construction and implementation. Not the actual installation, that is all a free and open tender, but oversight of this. And at the country or sector level, I mentioned that there are these issues with policies or things we would like to see improved there. So we do technical cooperation projects with government agencies. If people were here yesterday, you may have heard me going on a bit about the state of Mongolia. And that was the piece of work we're doing there, launching in the new year as an example of where we're trying to drive some fundamental change in their district energy system alongside our investments. And wherever possible, we would like to put in place national framework agreements. That means basically an agreement with the state that eases the process that may allow us to make loans or investment to multiple cities in the country with less bureaucracy. So a picture or an infographic is always worth 1,000 words. So here are some of the financing options I was just describing. It gets more complicated as you move to the right of the diagram. So the most basic, vanilla, plain and simple form of financing that could be provided is what's called a sovereign-backed loan. So this could be to the city or to the state. So the most basic is, let's say there is a state-owned district heating company owned by the national government. We can lend money to that national government, who then on-lends or grants that to that company. There can also be what's known as a sovereign guarantee. This is where we would lend money to city or municipality, but then there is an explicit guarantee that if there was any issue with that loan, we have the backing of the sovereign, with the backing of the state. There. And yeah, most states tend not to go bankrupt. Some notable exceptions. Next is a municipal loan. Now this is the most common form of lending in the district energy sector for us. This is where we lend to the city themselves or to the utility that's owned by the city with the guarantee to guarantee that in the event of default or in the event of non-payment, the municipality is there to cover it. In some cases, in some typically bigger cities, district energy companies, district heating companies are quite large, financially solvent entities in themselves. And they're able to stand on their own 2 feet and borrow directly from us without the need of any backing from outsiders. And on the right there, we have loans to PPP operators, public-private partnership operators, or private companies. Private companies, fairly straightforward. It's a form of what some people refer to as project finance. We also can lend to PPPs. PPPs are a bit more of a complex process because normally there is country-specific legislation governing public-private partnerships. And when we work with PPP partners, we normally like to be involved in the actual structuring of the PPP, assisting that, and then showing no bias, we would be hoping to lend money to a successful private PPP operator or some sort of public, quasi-public and private combination, special purpose vehicle in many cases. And investment size there is a pretty big range. Perhaps more interesting is the bottom end of that range. We tend not to work on projects that are less than €5 million in size, because honestly, we're quite a bureaucratic institution. There's a lot of administrative work that goes alongside with our loans. Our customers may often have to persevere with us through long, lots of forms and lots of approvals. So this costs money, and anything under 5 million, it costs too much, basically. So, apologies for the busy slide here, lack of pictures. But I want to give you a case study, an example of where EBRD took an equity stake in a privatization opportunity. So this is another form of collaboration with the private sector the EBRD can do, where we actually purchase equity in either newly founded or companies that exist for the purpose of achieving some of our aims. So The case study I'm describing took place in Poland, and it was with Dalkia Polska. I believe they're now referred to as Veolia today. I don't know if the Dalkia brand still exists outside of France. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. It's a bit of an old example, but it's probably closer to home for this audience. We have some new investments in companies, new equity stakes in companies in Kazakhstan, but this is probably more relevant. So the EBRD purchased 70 million, or invested 70 million euro in the newly created entity of Dalkia Polska. And this was a 35% stake. The remainder was held by the international Dalkia group. So EBRD was a part owner now of Dalkia, and as the Dalkia Polska moved to purchase networks through privatizations or invest in new networks throughout Poland, EBRD also lent money to the entity there. These were things like privatizations, concessions, and new lease contracts. This is one of our more successful ones. The aim is always that EBRD doesn't want to be a long-term equity holder. We're not in the business of owning companies or district heating companies. So EBRD exited their investment in 2010 and sold their shares back to Dalkia. The idea here is that this helps achieve a number of our aims, which include increasing private sector participation, and the investments that were made in this particular case when the networks were taken over, standards of service did improve and CO2 emissions went down. Yeah, you've heard, or I've talked to you about how we can lend money or invest. I want to talk about some of the programs we have in place to offer assistance, to get things off the ground and make improvements that matter to people like mayors and city councilors. So the first of these is our ReadyWeb Fund, which stands for Renewable District Energy in the Western Balkans. So for those of you that are from the Western Balkan countries, please pay attention to this. And my colleague Bojan Bogdanovic, who was here a moment ago, but is now out mingling, I believe. He is the head of this fund. And so if any of you are interested or have potential projects, please speak to him. I'll make sure that when he comes in, he stands up and identifies himself. But the aim of this fund, it's an Austrian-backed fund that aims to enable investment in renewables in Albania, Bosnia, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia. And it's meant to get projects moving from the beginning. So the funding is available for making improvements to local or national policies that would improve the environment for renewable district energy, for preparing feasibility studies, like I was describing earlier, as well as for running, doing capacity building assistance or running relevant workshops or networking events in this area. So this covers all renewable technologies in this area, plus, as we define, heat pumps as well are renewable, and the use of waste heat. There's the man himself. So, but what we believe is that due to the unique combination of the Western Balkans geography and the presence of district heating systems and the need for increased district heating systems, that solar-based district heating is one of, if not the best renewable opportunity here in the Western Balkans. So the fund has a special focus on increasing the level of solar district heating. Bojan, give everybody a wave. I was just singing your praises. We also have our EBRD Green Cities Framework. Now, when we say framework, we're referring to a pot of money that can be lent or invested to a set goal. In this case, it is different forms of municipal investments in cities in a number of categories there. The most important one for this audience, of course, is district energy. But it's other areas that where we feel we can make green improvements to the lives of city dwellers. So, focuses on the delivery of both strategy and policy support alongside money. How do we do this? So, if somebody wants to become an EBRD green city, there are a number of green cities already throughout the region. We're in one of them right now, Belgrade. Banja Luka is also a green city, Sarajevo too. There are some criteria here. So they need to be reasonably big, more than 100,000 people. They need to initiate what we call a trigger project. So they agree to work together with us on a project in one of those infrastructure categories, for instance, district energy. And that project must have a tangible green impact. In terms of CO2 emissions, it would have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by around 20%. We also want to see projects that would improve resilience to climate change, so water scarcity, or reduce other sorts of resource consumption. And once that trigger project has been initiated, the bank then has access to funds to provide what's called a Green City Action Plan, which is a piece of work that works together with that city to identify the key environmental pressures and issues in that city. The idea is that it should identify a pipeline of potential projects and improvements that are necessary in this city. Example of this was our work in Banja Luka, the project that we funded in Banja Luka. This was the trigger project for the Banja Luka Green City, and the Green City Action Plan in Banja Luka has just been completed. And then following this, projects come under what's known as the EBRD's Green City Framework, and they're able to access the pot of money. So this is all supported by donors, I described. I'm going to test my flag knowledge for a minute. So this is we've had received support from the Austrians, the South Koreans, Czech Republic or Czechia, and as it's called now, Sweden and Japan. And one of the benefits of becoming a green city as well is that we've received funds from the Green Climate Fund, which can provide CapEx grant funding for what are known as climate resilience investments, or it can provide concessional financing, which means even cheaper money. So money can be lent at interest rates that are even lower than what we would lend normally, these subsidized interest rates. It's only available in these 9 countries, but I hope this is relevant to some of the people in the room. Certainly for the Western Balkans, there is Albania, Macedonia, and Serbia in there. So, I'm going to wrap things up here. I want to say that we want to continue to support innovation in the sector, and we are very keen on not only funding public sector companies. We want to be involved in the private sector. Those PPPs and equity stakes are of great interest to the bank. We want to fund renewables increasingly. I've included energy from waste in there as well. And we want to see more innovation coming through in our projects. Something, again, that was mentioned quite a bit yesterday was the possibility of using thermal storage to mop up or collect surplus renewable electricity. More mundane but important, we want more improved data collection and management, because improved control can improve control, things like improved hydraulic modeling. These are all things that are important for running a modern, well-running district energy network. So, on that note, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.